A warning, this podcast talks about domestic violence.
We all have an idea of what love can be.
I want to see you again.
Now you see me.
You know what I mean.
The long-awaited, highly anticipated movie It Ends With Us hit theatres last month. The film stars Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni and is based on a best-selling book. And as soon as the press started, so did the drama.
Is there a rift between the cast of It Ends With Us?
On social media, fans are pointing out that Justin Baldoni didn't join fellow castmates for much of the press tour.
Justin Baldoni is being accused of fat-shaming Blake Lively on the It Ends With Us set.
The It Ends With Us franchise might end with the feud between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni.
First, it was rumours of an on-set feud between cast members. Early on, Justin was facing more of the heat for making Blake feel uncomfortable. Then the focus shifted, in part because the film is about domestic violence and fans were not impressed with how that theme was being handled.
If you are planning to go see It Ends With Us, I urge you to please really look into what it's actually about before you go see it. Trigger warning. This is a movie about domestic violence, and the way it's being marketed is not reflective of that at all.
Very quickly, things turned on Blake. About a month on, the tabloids are flooded with headlines accusing her of being a high school bully, a mean girl, a diva, who's going to be cancelled.
What in the world is going on with Blake Lively and the It Ends With Us drama?
We'll never know the truth of what goes on behind closed doors. But there's also, how it works. When there's smoke, there's fire.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, to unpack this drama, I sat down with Kate Roger, former entertainment editor for Newshub and current frequent flyer of Auckland cinemas.
I sat in a cinema on my own. I love a morning session, and often you can, late in a film's run, you can soak up a cinema on your own. And it was one of those, because I've been reading so much about this film and the fallout and the backlash, I've been fascinated by it, mainly because I think it's a really important issue. This film deals with domestic violence, but also I've always been absolutely fascinated when a film's marketing campaign implodes for whatever reasons, and I think I'm looking forward to discussing those very things. So I thought I better plonk myself in front of this film. It's not usually the kind of film that I'm going to get a lot out of. Rom-coms are a hard one for me because sometimes romance and comedy aren't great bedfellows in my mind. I get accused of loving dark and misery-laden love stories and and very dark black comedy. And this is a romance, allegedly.
Allegedly, but is it intended to be? Because, obviously it deals with quite a serious issue of domestic violence.
Of course.
Is it meant to be a rom-com?
It's definitely not meant to be a rom-com. It's definitely meant to be a chick flick, shall we say. And it's interesting when I watched it. I mean, for me, it was just a crime against cinema. I've never been so bored. It was one of those situations where you can imagine that this was sitting in an edit booth and there would have been a very specific choice from the filmmakers and producers about what direction they were going to go with this book. Have you read the Colleen Hoover book?
Yes, but I read the book after watching the movie.
Specifically to get a deep dive into it? Or
yes, and it's quite, usually you read the book and then you watch the movie, and the book and the movie are very different. So you didn't like the movie?
From a from a film review perspective, I couldn't work out whether it was trying to be sort of not R-rated, kind of sexy, romance that mixes into. And that's not to say that they were trying to make the domestic violence aspect of this story sexy, but I guess what they were trying to do was establish that real visceral connection between the two main protagonists, which is Blake Lively's character Lily Bloom and this neurosurgeon, very hot neurosurgeon, Ryle.
What's your name?
Lily. You?
Ryle.
And establish the fact that relationships can be full of love and chemistry and attraction, which can make it incredibly hard when it becomes violent. So, and I think it's really important as a woman or as a man to establish from the get-go that relationships are grey. Domestic violence is not, but it's very, very difficult when you're in a relationship. And in my early 20s, in one of my first big relationships, I was in an abusive relationship myself for the very first time at a very young age, and I have seen a lot of it since then. And it's very, very difficult to see the wood for the trees because you are in love with that person. And there is always that next moment and next day of, I can't believe I did that. I love you so much. I'm so sorry. I would never let anything like that happen to you again until it happens again. So I understand that. And the film, this is what the film kind of tries to portray. We want to know that Lily was in love, and that aspect of their relationship she was pretending didn't exist. And so many women and men, and may even be listening right now, will fully relate to and understand that. And I think it's incredibly important that it's not good guy, bad guy. And I think in this story, don't they try to establish the fact that he has a heart and a soul, and that he hates who he is and who he's become. And I do think that's important, but then make it about that, because the film for me was this weird little story of this, I'm going to say it, pretty dull kind of protagonist. Opens a flower shop in Boston, and we have flashbacks courtesy of a phenomenal actress that looks just like Blake. I wondered if she may have done ADR afterwards and voiced some of it, because she even sounded like Blake.
I think from the get-go, we just had such a seamlessness about conversating, and like the ideas that we had about Lily were so concrete and so similar.
So we have the two stories, her growing up as a teenager. She comes from an abusive home where her father beats her mother, so she has a history of that. But again, it was one of those situations where it was that overly kind of schmaltzy approach, whether it's to bring more people in. I think the film quite literally, Davina, didn't know what it was. And I got a sense that perhaps that Baldoni, who was the director and who also starred opposite Blake Lively, I don't know if that's the film he wanted to make. There's been so much conversation and controversy around it.
Yes, it seems to be a web of drama, right? There's all these different strands that are coming off it. And what's probably helpful to do for listeners is to take it right back to the very beginning and talk about how it all started.
There was some red carpets to promote this film. The fan base on TikTok and Instagram, social media generally, were instantly, their spidey senses, noticed that they were never photographed together. And when you've got two main stars in a film, that did seem slightly unusual, and especially since he was the director as well. I looked at it and I thought, well, he, from what I knew, perhaps, played the character that was involved in the domestic violence, so maybe it was a very specific thing. But now seeing the film, I see that is random. Mm-hmm. And that's when it all started. And also Hollywood Reporter and some of these bigger entertainment companies started covering the fact that there was a lot of buzz, that they could confirm from the set that there was, there was a dynamic that perhaps wasn't functioning.
Justin Baldoni is being accused of fat-shaming Blake Lively on the It Ends With Us set.
He allegedly lingered too long on a kiss with Blake Lively and made her feel uncomfortable.
The first inkling of drama that I became aware of was that there were too many cooks in the kitchen, so to say.
Yep.
Ryan Reynolds supposedly wrote the opening scene.
He wrote it. He works on everything I do. I work on everything he does. So his wins, his celebrations are mine, and mine are his. I mean, he's all over this film.
It does sound like too many cooks in the kitchen. I think you have a director that doesn't have the clout that his leading lady has. And then when you throw Ryan into the mix as well. I mean, when it comes to the internet, is there a couple that has owned that space in such a way, and so belovedly, the way that they trade insults and sick burns have been going back and forth, and then the lead up obviously with Ryan's Deadpool and Wolverine and tagging onto each other in terms of the marketing. What a piece of genius. You can imagine both those marketing teams sitting down and going, let's, rubbing their hands together with joy. So it's just been clever from that aspect, but dialing it back, as you were talking about there in terms of being on the production, I think if you've got someone that is not enjoying the direction of where a film's going, and she shares that with hubby at home, and then, that becomes something on set, that feels not great. But then I'm not on that set, so I can't speak to it.
It doesn't seem very professional either. I mean, it kind of feels like Justin had his moment to do his directing debut, I think, even. But it kind of seems like Ryan and Blake kind of bulldozed in and were like, no, we're going to change this. I mean, there's supposedly 2 cuts of the film. There's 2 posters.
Yeah. And it's, you can imagine which one, they were probably going down the line of which one's going to make the most money. It's so hard because everybody's got an opinion, and a lot of it isn't based on the fact that we don't have Blake sitting here in the room. We don't have anyone sitting here in the room that was on set, that was an eyewitness to all of this. And, just think about the NDAs. Every single film and film set you go on, you sign an NDA. So, will we ever get to the bottom of that? I guess we can have all the conjecture we like. We'll never know the truth of what goes on behind closed doors. But there's also, how it works when there's smoke. There's fire. And I think it's been so interesting since, and when the marketing was all about wear your florals and get the girls and go along to this lovely romance film, and the way that it was pitched, I think that's why there's been a bit of a blowback.
It Ends With Us is in theaters now, so grab your friends, wear your florals, and head out to see it.
I was fascinated last night that before or after there was no slate saying if any of this is triggering. I know they have that a lot when we're dealing with abuse or mental abuse or any mental health issues on screen. With something like this, I would have expected something to come up. It just didn't have the gravitas that this film needed. And it was dealing with some, it's violence in the home is not acceptable. That's a no-brainer. I can't believe I even said that. But, it needed to have a warning or a slate, and there was kind of nothing there.
That's been a common criticism and escalated when fans began focusing on how Blake Lively was promoting the film.
The boots were mine. There's these great Louboutins that are also a close-up on them when we're dancing in the bar. Those are mine.
I think that you are so much, and not to minimize it anyway, but you're so much more than just a survivor or just a victim. Well, that is a huge thing. You are a person of multitudes.
I have a few of my husband's shirts and socks randomly in the movie. I have some of Gigi Hadid's sweaters in the movie.
But Kate says that's all part of the game.
Look, the marketers, they want you to buy a ticket to a film. It wouldn't be the first time, and it most certainly will not be the last, where you are sold an idea of a film to get you in there and it's a different film altogether. I think audiences are now at a point where we don't want that feeling, where we bought a ticket to a film and got a completely different one. And this is a classic example of marketers kind of selling a film that maybe ended up being closer than they thought to it, but not in a way that would be enough, and certainly not with enough warning. I'm not sure where her publicity team are going with this now. After it all blew up, there was a deafening silence from Camp Lively. And I think the unfortunate side of it as well was, which she says was a random coincidence, that she launched her hair brand at the same time. What an absolute load of rubbish. Obviously, any marketer is going to, whether it's Jason Momoa and his vodka, whether it's The Rock and his tequila, they're not stupid. They're entrepreneurs. Of course, when they're having a moment and they're constantly getting interviews, they're going to launch something or talk about something. And Ryan did the same with his aviation gin. So the timing, don't deny it. But maybe that wasn't the film to tack a branding exercise on as well. I think it's just, it's been a marketing sort of masterclass watching it, how it's just completely unravelled.
It's kind of a masterclass in what not to do.
Yeah, but I tell you what it's done. Sold tickets.
That's true.
That film's made an absolute fortune.
Has it overshadowed the original intent of the film, though?
Well, we don't know, because the original intent's now so skewed, isn't it? So yes. The film maybe Justin wanted to make is very different. And if you look at kind of his MO, he's an entrepreneur in Hollywood as well, but he's very much, he's had a viral TED Talk and been on a lot of podcasts, and he has a not-for-profit that he has set up. He seems to have, and he talks a lot about masculinity, so that I'm sure that's why he took on this book and this film. So I think his version of it may or may not have been the version that he wanted to make. We don't know, but there's certainly, after watching it, there are certainly at least 3 different films that could have come out of that.
One of the mini-dramas came about when a Norwegian journalist decided to release an interview she did with Blake in 2016, revealing what she describes as, quote, the most uncomfortable interview situation she has ever experienced.
First of all, congrats on your little bump.
Congrats on your little bump.
You like the movie? Are you a Woody Allen fan?
I love most of his movies, and this one was so, like, visually amazing.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Did you guys love wearing those kind of clothes that you...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, working in digital...
Everyone wants to talk about the clothes, but I wonder if they would ask the men about the clothes.
I have had to sit through a few interviews like that myself, and they're really scarring because you come out of them thinking it was your fault and, oh my goodness, because you don't want to offend the talent and you don't want to be blacklisted. And the interviews that you get that have a real connection are talent that treat you like a human being and a peer. And that's not what that was. In fact, it was far, far worse than that. When I watched that, it almost made me cry. It was just horrific. And I think Kirsty was so brave. She used so many back cuts in it to show that she was smiling through.
Obviously, this is an interview that happened 8 years ago. In one article, the reporter insists she wasn't aware of the It Ends With Us controversy that was brewing and saying her choice to share the interview now was a coincidence.
I find that fascinating.
You don't buy that?
I don't buy that. And that's an unusual thing to hear her say because I think she was very specific about it. I don't know when she put it up on her YouTube. When she says controversy, I mean, she still released it when the film came out. So whether the controversy had got to this point, because don't forget that this really kicked off this conversation around Blake. But it absolutely wasn't a coincidence that she put it out when the film came out.
It's hardly the first time a drama like this has swirled around a film.
It happened really quickly, and I don't hate Blake Lively. I find it fascinating to watch how the internet can swing against. You look at Olivia Wilde when Don't Worry Darling came out.
Warner Brothers is weighing in on the Don't Worry Darling drama. On September 23rd, Vulture released a report that the film's star, Florence Pugh, and director Olivia Wilde got into a, quote, screaming match.
It's a very similar, and that felt so misogynistic. And there will be absolutely the pile-on for that very reason into this. You can look at it in two separate ways. The door gets opened, and then other journalists are like, you know what, I'm going to do that too. Or other people go, I'm going to tell my story too. And then that's human nature. I don't like it. Is it, she's getting her comeuppance or I don't know her. But it certainly seems that, again, I will come back to the when there's smoke, there's fire. And there's two different options to look at it this way. I think we are living in such an interesting time where people are getting called out more. For how they behave. And maybe one train of thought will be that perhaps that's how Blake's behaved her whole life and she's getting called out on it. I suspect there are far worse situations on set with divas and prima donnas if we're talking about women. Some of the behaviour that I've witnessed and some of the behaviour that must go on is actually an unacceptable way to treat people. And I suspect there's just ghastly behaviour that goes on.
She's always been known for, I think we alluded to it earlier, of her and Ryan Reynolds bantery, ripping each other out on social media. That same kind of content is being taken now and used to portray her as this mean girl. Do you think that's fair?
No. And that's the problem as well with, I'll call it the internet, but with social media, you can twist just about anything any way you want. And that's why I think Kirsty's interview felt pure because we were watching it from top to bottom. If I sit down and have 4 minutes with Miles Teller or John Hamm, I get to cut that interview any way I want. We have the ability to control how we edit something. I mean, even a documentary filmmaker has an agenda. She goes out and creates a film. So if you're in an edit booth or if you're on your phone, you could take anything that anybody says and pitch it in such a way that it comes across negatively instead of positively or vice versa. So you do have to be pretty careful with that. And also, you can see her sense of humour online when it comes to Ryan, and it's edgy. She knows how to make a dig. So that the fan aspect of it is, I find, really interesting. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I was going to say is that the fact that she likes to make a dig used to be like what people loved about
That's
her,
right.
is that she was so relatable. And now she hasn't changed the way she's acting.
No, of course
but
not.
the way that people are perceiving it is different. And I just question whether that is... I guess fair.
Yeah, I know. And again, I don't want to keep making it about human nature or keep making it about social media necessarily, but you're absolutely right. But there's also a version that a performer or an actor will present for the public eye. And I don't kid myself. I love the question when people say, oh, you know, what was Meryl Streep really like? Or what was Keanu really like? It's a classic one. It's very much an emphasis on the really. And I can absolutely talk to what they were really like with my 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute interview, and what my gut tells me that they were like, and how they treated me and spoke to me, and how we conversed. But whatever that is a performance for them also. And if you were Keanu Reeves, or if, you know, whoever you were, Halle Berry, you would only really reveal a portion of yourself to the public, let alone to another human being you've only just met, who you're going to meet another complete stranger in 4 minutes' time and have the same conversation with. It's completely artificial. So back to your question with Blake, you know, who is she? Who is Blake Lively? And what is she like when she deals with people on set or in public? And why do we care?
Was going to be my next question. What makes us so obsessed with celebrity dramas?
Oh, we love it. I mean, that horrific court case with Depp and Heard. I mean, that was just, I found that so ghoulish. I couldn't watch a frame of it, but everybody did. I can't believe they laid cameras in court for that. And that became, again, a huge misogynistic wade-in.
Justin Baldoni has now hired a crisis manager. Is this a signal that we haven't even reached the high point of this feud?
I think more, and I feel like it's flattening out a fraction, but then I think there's probably more to come. And I think a couple of days ago, I have been lazing on a beach in Fiji, excuse me, so it might be more than a couple of days ago that he went to his Instagram and made a pretty crisis management written, but all the same sounded from the heart, to survivors. So specifically, with no context at all around it, or a recognition that this whole situation exists. And I thought that was interesting because, of course, the first thing that comes up, everyone's going to grab onto that, and of course it's going to make headlines. And but it must be really hard for him as a relative no-name. And let's just face it, perhaps if none of this had happened, would he immediately become the next go-to, you know, director, filmmaker, actor? I mean, I'd never heard of him up until this point. I mean, his profile's gone through the roof, but, you know, it's that adage, you know, no, I'm going to forget it, you'll remember it, but there's no such thing as bad...
bad press.
Thank you. No such thing as bad press, because all of a sudden, you know, Blake already had this, and now his entire persona and career has been elevated to quite extreme levels. And of course, a crisis management person will be able to help navigate all. I mean, his phone would not be stopped. You know, he'd be constantly hounded, and it would have changed his life. And do I look at that and say, wow, you've hired a crisis manager? I tell you what, if I had the money, I would be too. I mean, and I can't imagine what sort of meetings are going on in Camp Lively for that reason as well, and where she goes to from here, because I think there had been talk of a sequel. And then the headlines were, there's no way that there's going to be another one of these films. And given how much money it made, it was an absolute shoo-in to dive in again.
Everyone's talking about how Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively became the first Hollywood power couple since Bruce Willis and Demi Moore to get 2 major hit movie box office, which is amazing. And then they say, but it came at a cost of Blake's career. But do you think it's going to be her downfall?
I mean, Johnny Depp's getting cast in films, and so is Kevin Spacey. I don't think there's ever it's all over in Hollywood, but I would be absolutely gobsmacked if there was a sequel to this film. And I think there will be blowback. And mainly, you know, because Hollywood is a classic overreactor. It just takes a couple of bad headlines and people will swerve.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Gwen McClure. Thank you to Kate Roger for joining me, Davina Zimmer. Mā te wā.